All right, in this installment, we are going to be going through the PowerPoint of Art for Quizbowl, essentially around number 7576, which on the list is Fauvism and Henri Matisse, through around 90 or so, which is going to be Walter Gropius with the Bauhaus and the like. So here we're going to first start with Vasily Kandinsky, who is the artist of The Blue Rider. This particular painting is going to give rise to an entire art movement that was relevant in Germany in the 1900s, the 1910s. And essentially, it was Der Blaue Reiter, or the Blue Rider group, that was influenced by this particular painting. So that's really all you need to know, is that Kandinsky, that fellow there, is the artist of the Blue Rider, and it gave its name to the entirety of the whole movement, as it were. So we move on to Edvard Munch. Very often in Quizbowl, you will find that particular countries have one particular guy. And this is a fellow, Edvard Munch, from Norway. If there is one Norway author to know, that would be the playwright Ibsen. If there is one Norwegian composer to know, that would be Edvard Grieg. And this is the one really visual artist at the high school level to know. His name is Edvard Munch, and this is his painting, The Scream, which shows a fellow with his hands around his head at the bottom, with quite a vivid sky. Some people have suggested that the sky is essentially an observation as made by Munch around the time of his painting from the eruption of the Indonesian volcano Krakatoa in 1883. It was recently, and by recently I say within the last 20, 30 years, stolen from Oslo, where it was, of course, housed as the capital of Norway, but it is a work that comes up quite a bit. Some other works from Munch comes up, but never as much as The Scream. This is his only painting that could stand alone as a toss-up answer. So we move on to one of the most famous artists of all time, and that is, of course, Vincent van Gogh, famous for his mental illness problems that he obviously suffered from. He cut off his own ear, amongst other things. But let's get to his paintings. You have an early work by Van Gogh, The Potato Eaters. It comes up sometimes. It talks about the central light that obviously is lighting the table for these peasants who are enjoying a meal of potatoes. The Potato Eaters. We move on to Still Life, Vase with 12 Sunflowers. Van Gogh, very famous for his sunflowers. I remember when I was much younger, this painting particularly sold for quite a bit of money, and I think for a while held the record for the highest selling painting of all time. The Café Terrace on the Place du Forum in Arles. Arles is the city in France particularly with Van Gogh is most associated. And this is perhaps the most famous of his paintings. It is Starry Night. I always like to mention in toss-ups the cypress tree to the left and the church's steeple that you can see in the middle bottom of the painting that is there, but nevertheless comes up quite a bit, Starry Night. This is Irises, also by Van Gogh, another still life of flowers in a vase. And that's essentially what we have for him. I've not included on here Bedroom at Arles, which, of course, Arles, again, that city with which he is most associated. And this painting was made from an insane asylum at Arles. I think at Arles, could be wrong about that, but nevertheless. And, of course, I'm also leaving out in my PowerPoint haystacks. So move on to John Singer Sargent. For John Singer Sargent, he has Madame X, which was rather controversial when it was first introduced, but not much comes up for him outside of Madame X, which is the painting you see at the right-hand side with the woman in the rather low-cut dress that is there. Rather a sensual painting, which is why the reason it was somewhat of a scandal when it debuted. Marc Chagall, much like I said before that, for example, Norway has its one artist, its one composer, its one whatever it might be. Quizbowl is very much often going to pigeonhole various people by describing them as, for example, if you hear Danish physicist, it's going to be Niels Bohr, who worked on, of course, the new model of the atom. Well, for Marc Chagall, he is a Russian Jewish fellow, and so therefore that is something that you need to pay attention to. But his main painting, you also have Paris Through the Window, which includes a view of the Eiffel Tower. But his number one piece is I and the Village. It always talks about the green face on the right-hand side, the sheep's head on the left-hand side, the upside-down woman, the man carrying a scythe that you have here. But I and the Village by Marc Chagall comes up quite a bit. Study these paintings, look at the details, look up on QB Reader of the various different details that are described in the questions, and it'll help you be able to get the question correct when it comes up again, which it inevitably will do. So I Am the Village by Marc Chagall, but don't forget Paris Through the Window, which inevitably would not be its own toss-up answer, but would rather Chagall be the toss-up answer, and it would describe it. So take your time and go and look it up. Here you have Nude Descending a Staircase, number 2 by Marcel Duchamp. This is not necessarily, and I don't know why when I made the PowerPoint didn't include his fountain or his painting of the Mona Lisa with a mustache drawn on it, but Nude Descending a Staircase. People at the time described it. I like it. I think it really evokes movement down a stairwell or a staircase, as you can see here. People described it as a explosion in a shingle factory. But just to go back to Quizbowl here, you can put in Duchamp and see what I mean by the other items that come up. Let's go with the difficulties that we have for high school that we have there. So sorry, I didn't already have this pulled up. But you can see here, we don't want that. We want it only to be the answer line, and search again. And there you go, in which you can see the various items that you have here. So make sure that you do these sorts of things for yourself as you are trying to obviously, gain your knowledge. You can see here Mona Lisa with a mustache, as I just described. Nevertheless, Nude Descending a Staircase, number 2. Explosion in a shingle factory comes up quite often. And there you go again, mustachioed Mona Lisa. 50cc of Paris Air. You can find that actually in a museum in Philadelphia, of all places. But there it is. And of course, Armut on that urinal that I described earlier. So it's not in my PowerPoint, but obviously things that you necessarily might want to know. We move on to Pablo Picasso, who in many ways can be argued as one of, if not the most important painter of the 20th century. He is an inventor of Cubism with Georges Braque. But that is always something, obviously, to take note of. But these are the works of him that come up most often. First and foremost, you have during his blue period, the man with the guitar. That is Picasso. He has a rose period and a blue period. Very often you'll find in Quizbowl that the answer line will be blue. And one of the clues will be this period of Picasso's life featured man with guitar. And there you've got it, blue. And so therefore, during his blue period, and you'd see from the painting why necessarily you would call that period what it is. You have Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which shows some prostitutes of d'Avignon, or Avignon, city in France that in the medieval period the papacy moved to during the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. It always likes to talk about the African masks that the 2 women on the right-hand side obviously feature. But Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, a common clue, at least for Picasso, if not necessarily an answer line in and of itself. And I would argue perhaps the most famous of paintings for Picasso, this being Guernica. The bombing of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s is the subject of the painting that you have here. It always likes to talk about a hand with a broken sword, an exploding light bulb, the bull on the left-hand side, the woman holding her baby in anguish. Of course, the child is most likely dead after the bombing. But all of these clues, the broken sword that one sees here down at the bottom, the hand that is holding it and the like. But it is a large painting and perhaps the one that comes up most often for Picasso. So make sure you know Guernica comes up quite a bit. The next one we are going to have is a fellow who is a Mexican muralist. Remember that murals are paintings on walls, not to be confused necessarily with frescoes, which are also wall paintings on plaster most of the time. But nevertheless, he was the actual husband of Frida Kahlo that we'll see in just a moment, that doubtlessly is going to follow immediately therein. But, we don't even have any paintings for him. Oh, that's too bad. He is the painter of Detroit Industry and Man at the Crossroads. And since this is a recording, I'm going to quickly go look a couple of those up. And here we go. So, Diego Rivera. There it is. And there he comes up. Let's go to his Wikipedia and see if we cannot find, that's his portrait that is there. There he is with his wife, Frida Kahlo, as you can see, noted for her eyebrows, which are so distinctive. But we're looking for some of his paintings, particularly those that I mentioned, Detroit Industry and Man at the Crossroads. And so if we can see them here, those are the one that comes up most often in, obviously, the Quizbowl idiom that we are dealing with. And still, maybe it's not going to come up as easily. Here we are. So a lot of murals showing Aztec stuff. And so history of Mexico, looking for it here. I'm so sorry. Man of the Crossroads, there it is. Here's the mural by Diego Rivera that came out in 1934, as you can read down here at the bottom. And Detroit Industry, that's the other one that comes up quite a bit. As you can see there, it's at the Detroit Institute of the Arts. So Diego Rivera, obviously. As I said, he was married to Frida Kahlo, who has those distinctive eyebrows. And there's a painting of both of them that are there. Kahlo has quite a bit. I suppose we can go back and take a look at her as well, back in the Wikipedia that we have here. So let's exit out there. And all the way up to the top, doubtlessly it's going to indicate his marriage to her. There it is. A little bit of a fun trivia, or not trivia at all, but information as well. For a while, Leon Trotsky from the Russian Revolution lived with them in Mexico as he escaped from persecution and the rise of Stalin in the Soviet Union. And he was killed, assassinated with an ice pick, as it were. But there's the Frida Kahlo. And we'll take a look at some of the paintings that she, of course, had. Suffered from a horrible car wreck. There it is, a self-portrait with a thorn necklace and a hummingbird. Hummingbird, obviously, quite a role in the Aztec Mexican mythology, with, of course, Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec god that comes up with some frequency. And scrolling down to the bottom, some other self-portraits and the like. There's one particularly that she features herself. I thought that it would have more, but oh well, it did not. It shows herself pierced with some various different arrows and the like. But nevertheless, Frida Kahlo, the wife of the Mexican muralist. So we move on after we see both of them together to someone that comes up quite a bit, and that is Edward Hopper. Edward Hopper, whose painting Nighthawk shows three people at a bar. There is no exterior doors, Philly's cigars up at the top and the like. There is also Automat that you can see on the left-hand side that usually comes up before Nighthawks, and on the right-hand side, Chop Suey. You can find Nighthawks in the Art Institute of Chicago, but he comes up quite a bit, and clues like Philly's Cigars is advertised at the top of this painting, and a woman in a red dress, and a couple of men in a fedora at the bar, and all these other sorts of things that kind of shows a sense of loneliness and isolation in an urban setting. But Edward Hopper comes up a lot in Quizbowl, and so something to be aware of. So there's Automat and Chop Suey, both of which come up quite a bit as well. And then Alexander Calder. He is the master of the mobile. I don't want to reduce the art form in saying that it is a glorified wind chime, but nevertheless, the mobile is his medium or work, as it were. His most famous works are, of course, Lobster Trap. I don't know if either of these are. I think maybe the one on the right is Lobster Trap, but very often you can extrapolate that they are looking for Alexander Calder in the toss-up by describing what a mobile is like. Like I say, it's not just simply a glorified wind charm. It's more than that, obviously, but it has these moving parts, hence why the name mobile. But he is the guy that is associated with the art form known as the mobile. And we will stop on the Bauhaus. The Bauhaus is more like, and it's of course founded by Walter Gropius, and we will take a look at it, I suppose. But nevertheless, it is a art movement of the early 20th century featured in Germany. And it's an architectural style, but more than that as well. And so this will be the last thing. We'll take a look at it. And here we go with the Bauhaus. There we are, a German school of art and art movement. As you can see here, early 20th century, like I said, but it's artistic visions with principles of mass production and function, and it was founded by the architect Walter Gropius. Bauhaus included Paul Klee with his twittering machine. I don't know if that's included, but hopefully it'll be coming up soon. And, of course, Vasily Kandinsky, that we've already talked about before. Those two are the fellows particularly. But the Bauhaus, a art movement and architectural movement that was, of course, promoted by Walter Gropius himself, founded in the Weimar. Now, the last thing that I think that we need to talk about that is not in my PowerPoint, and I'm embarrassed that it is not, is the artist James Whistler, and there you can see him. He is in the last half of the 19th century, painter active during the Gilded Age. Remember, that is the last part. And he is famous for his nocturnes that you can see there. His nocturnes we'll take a look at in a moment, and his most famous painting by far, arrangement in Graham Black #1, simply known as his Mother. So, his nocturnes, particularly, you have there Nocturne Blue and Gold, which is the old Battersea Bridge. It's at the Tate Museum in Britain, in London, for the Tate Museum of Modern Art. And, of course, his masterpiece is that arrangement in Graham Black #1. His common name is Whistler's Mother. It's held at the Musée d'Orsay, which is a museum in Paris that was at one point a train station. But here it, of course, shows Whistler's mother herself. Have you ever seen the Goofy movie of the late 90s, Mr. Bean? Mr. Bean being a comedian played by Rowan Atkinson. Of course, it is the this painting, particularly the center of that movie, Whistler's mother, as it were. And then, of course, just a couple of other of nocturnes. Nocturne in Black and Gold, The Falling Rocket, that you have here. It's at the Detroit Institute of the Arts, as well as others. So, nevertheless, thanks so much for watching. That gets us through the next 15, and hopefully you will continue to study and get better for all the artwork that is contained within my PowerPoint, and hopefully beyond it as well. So, good luck, and keep studying. Learn more, go out on your own, and expand your knowledge.